Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Cass Nelson-Dooley. I've been working in the integrative and functional medicine field for about 18 years. It's been wonderful, such an exciting field that we're in, where we can look at root causes of illness and not just address the symptoms, really helping people with chronic illnesses that don't have a lot of answers from other systems of medicine. And so let's dive in and let's talk a little bit about the brain and how we can use organic acids testing to understand more about our patient's nervous system. So the organic acids test, you guys hopefully have been seeing more about the organic acids profile. DSL upgraded the OAP, and it's a very kind of packed test, right? There's a lot of bang for the buck with the OAP. We can look at a lot of different systems of the body with this test, not just one or two or three, but many. For example, here this slide helps us see, we can look at cellular metabolism, we can look at nutrition, toxicity, oxidative stress, gut dysbiosis, and of course, what we're interested in today is brain chemistry. So the value of this test is that you can connect the dots. You can see things that even you and your patient don't even know are going on. This test can help uncover metabolic issues, issues with cellular function that you don't even realize are happening. So it's a very powerful tool. Today, we are going to learn about the nervous system and how we can use this test that requires just a single urine specimen. And with this information, you can design more effective treatment protocols. We're also going to go over a case study, right? I love those the most for teaching and learning this type of medicine. And we have a neuropsychiatric patient to go over today. We will talk about the different parts of the report that are most relevant in your patients that have psychoemotional symptoms, and kind of drill in a little bit into those neurological markers. And then we'll talk about treatment solutions, because I know as a clinician at the end of the day, you kind of want to know, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now with my patient that's on the other side of the clinical room from me? And we'll have question and answer at the end, okay? So looking forward to the question and answer session also. I have experience going way back to Metametrics Clinical Laboratory, for those of you who remember that company, and I had the pleasure and honor of working under Alexander Brawley and Richard Lord, who were the developers of the first organic acids test that was serving the functional medicine or integrative medicine field. Prior to that, we had inborn errors of metabolism testing. So standard medicine was using these markers in the way of screening for inborn errors of metabolism. But it was Andy and Richard who conceived of this idea, like, how can this be adapted for integrative and functional medicine, for personalized medicine? And Andy would often say, he felt one of the greatest selling points of the organic acids is that it really was like a serum chemistry test for functional medicine. Because this test, you can run this test every year on someone, and you can scan all these different areas of health and physiology and kind of figure out what's happening with the functional state of the cell. And it's very convenient, and it gives you a lot of information in one shot. And even the National Institutes of Health will acknowledge that, metabolomics, which is really what we're talking about here. Organic acids are metabolites, right? Biological metabolites. Metabolomics is more representative of the functional state of a cell than genomics or proteomics. And, hey, we can pat ourselves on the back, right? We've been doing this for 30 years. And now it's finally kind of hot in the research, metabolomics. There's a lot of stuff you can find these days when you search metabolomics. And because the OAP gathers so much information within this one test, you can use it as a tool to assess many different conditions, ranging, there's a big range here, right? I'm not going to go into every one of these conditions, of course, because we're going to break them out. Because I do want to tell you the top conditions that I would think of call for an organic acids Profile, an OAP. So my first category is neurological complaints or psychoemotional conditions, because we get to look at a lot of different markers that affect the nervous system in this test. So, from Alzheimer's disease, anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar. I would even add in here, suicidal tendencies or suicidal thoughts, anger or rage, kind of outbursts, behavioral problems. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can that fit this. This would be a top test to run in those types of patients. My second big bucket for conditions that are a good fit for this test are patients that present like they may have mitochondrial dysfunction or fatigue, because you get a lot of information about the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell with this test. So cardiovascular disease is a biggie. Any issues with the heart, right? Because the heart is like a battery. It is jam-packed with mitochondria. It's actually the number one most densely packed mitochondrial tissue. There is the heart. Chronic fatigue, exercise intolerance, when there's poor muscle mass, when there's, even when there's metabolic diseases, often it can be traced back to mitochondria. And even patients that you believe have had a toxic exposure and have been harmed by toxins, that can affect the mitochondria. My third category is metabolic disease, right? These were originally used as screens and still are today to screen for inborn errors of metabolism. So of course, we can pick those up in those extreme cases, or we can pick up mild versions, right? People that are going around with a little snip in that enzyme, they don't know they have an issue. It's not extreme, but with a little bit of nutritional support, that enzyme could be working better, and that would be the case, like basically a mild snip in a pathway. But we can also get a lot of information for those patients with obesity or liver disease, insulin resistance, diabetes, weight loss resistance. And then last but not least, those patients that you think have nutritional needs. This is a great test for them. Patients who have had a toxic exposure, we can get some information about toxicity and glutathione in this test. And then also those big medical mystery patients, right? Patients that have been to a lot of different practitioners and everything's showing up fine, and yet they are very ill. So when you're kind of searching, like you're searching under every rock, turning over every rock to figure out, how do I help this patient? What is really at the root of this? An organic acids test can help you do that. And all of these are true, especially when they're seen together with gut symptoms. So because the test also gives a scan of gut dysbiosis or microbial metabolites, you get a little information about, okay, do we have some dysbiosis going on that we may want to drill down into further? So systemic symptoms with gut symptoms, organic acids is a nice test for that. Now, of course, the GI map is the test for drilling down into gut health. So if you have a patient that's predominantly having gut symptoms, the GI map may just be the best test for that patient. Okay, so let's just, before we dive in, I know I'm excited to get to this case with you guys, but let's just talk a little bit about the premise of organic acids, because it's not very intuitive. Organic acids are metabolic byproducts. They are intermediates, and they are not nutrients themselves, right? It's not like we're not measuring B12 in urine. We're not measuring, CoQ10 in urine. We are measuring the metabolic byproducts of these pathways. And when they go high in urine, they tell us that a nutrient is needed. So it's a little tricky, but once you kind of get the premise down, it makes a lot more sense going forward. So here's a pathway. Organic acid A goes to B, goes to C. In that first step, we have an enzyme AB, and that's the enzyme that helps convert organic acid A to B. Now, this enzyme requires iron and riboflavin in order to do its job. So if it doesn't have enough iron and riboflavin, organic acid A can't move on to organic acid B in the pathway, so it will be blocked. It will block that pathway, and now organic acid A will spill into urine. So when we have organic acid A going high in urine, it tells us the patient needs iron and riboflavin. Once the practitioner is able to replete those nutrients for the patient, the enzyme can function properly again, and then A can convert to B to C, and we have happy, happy metabolism once again. For those of you who haven't used the organic acids report very much, we have two different reference ranges. We have a 95th percent limit. That's kind of your standard reference range you're used to on all lab reports. It's on the right-hand side. And this report here is saying that 95% of people have pyroglutamic acid less than 495. So that's a 95th percent limit. If the patient's above that 495, they are in the top 5% of the population for pyroglutamic acid. That's very abnormal. That's statistically significant. That's something that would be a high priority clinically. And then in contrast, because we're in integrative and functional medicine, we want to address issues before they become real problems, right? We want to prevent illness. So we also have an optimum range to help you see when things are going off track before they become like a real problem. So we have what we call the 80th percent limit, or it's called also quintiles. And by this range, 80% are normal, that's the green zone, and 20% are abnormal, that's the yellow and red zone of the bar graph. And if you're curious how we do this, you can imagine that we took 100 people, 100 urine specimens, and we measured that pyroglutamic acid, and then we lined up those results lowest to highest. We drew a line at the 20th result, the 40th, the 60th, the 80th, and the 100th, and now we have a percentile ranking by quintile, and we can show you exactly where your patient falls in that population. So it's pretty helpful when you want to really figure out what's going on and how abnormal is something. The 95th percent and 80th percent can help you basically build a treatment hierarchy, because abnormals that are over the 95th percent can be like your top priority items. And then abnormals that are over the 80th percent, like this number 65, 3,4-dihydroxyhydrocinamic acid at 4.0. That one is over the 80th. It's not yet over the 95th, right? Because it's not flagged red and it doesn't have an H. So you can tell it's high, but it's not extremely high. So that one might be more of a second priority. And this can just help as you're kind of building your plan. Some of these reports, everything is abnormal, and it's, you kind of need a strategy to figure out, okay, what's the most important thing for me to focus on with this patient? The other thing that I want to mention here is that in September, there were some major improvements made to the report. So the front page has summary information that kind of tells you what the marker means and what to do about it. And then the back page also has like kind of your essential recommendations based on the patient's lab result. So we're trying to make organic acids testing easier to use. I'm so glad you guys showed up for this call today. This is not the easiest test in the world, but it is a very powerful tool. So if you can put in the time and have the patience to learn this tool, it pays off in spades. And it's such a beautiful addition to your other tools in your toolkit, like stool testing or hormone testing or food sensitivity, etc. Okay, let's take a look at all the information you get in an organic acids test. There are 72 biochemical markers. You get this summary of imbalances, as I mentioned, which is basically an interpretive, couple of pages of interpretation to help you understand those lab results. We have glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. So we're looking at how well does the patient make energy, cellular energy. We also have fatty acid oxidation, so how well are they making energy from fat? We go into nutritional markers like B12 and folate and biotin, B vitamins and lipoic acid. We look at markers of stress and mood like cortisol and neurotransmitters. We have toxic impacts, so we're looking for toxic exposures. We're checking on glutathione status, which is so important for the brain as well, which we are talking about today. And then lastly, we have microbial metabolites, like I mentioned. So you can kind of take a look at what's happening with the gut microbiome through the lens of the organic acids. And lastly, there is a personalized metabolic recommendation. So this is kind of the bare bones, what is called for based on your patient's test result. And for people who are new to the organic acids, I think it's important to kind of have a strategy as you get more familiar with this test, because it can be a ton of information and it can be overwhelming. So I encourage beginners to take one category at a time. As we go through this case, you'll see there's these, the test is broken up into categories, 5 major categories, and to kind of look at it from that bird's eye view. Okay, this little subsection is abnormal, and just stick with that. Try not to drill down too deeply at first. Ultimately, with this test, we are looking for high levels pretty much most of the time. So a high organic acid means the patient needs a nutrient. And so once you see, oh, my patient has high levels, then you're looking for what are the nutrient needs that are associated with this marker. So the report gives you some guidance. The interpretive guide gives you some guidance. We have a really nice interpretive guide. You can use the reference ranges to help prioritize when you need to. Oh, this one's really, this biotin need is really extreme, whereas, this glucose level is just a little bit high, so you can kind of get some ideas of how to prioritize your work. Consider low levels if they're relevant. There are a few markers like neurotransmitters where if they're low, that's a concern too. And then you can dive deeper into the biochemistry when you can, right? When you have the bandwidth and when you just want to drill down. I mean, every one of these markers could practically have like a PhD thesis written on it. So there is tons of information out there, and especially now that metabolomics is exploding, there's just so much. And then at the same time, we're still on the cutting edge. We are finding out things that aren't known yet. There's no one measuring, hundreds of people's pyroglutamic acid and doing studies on it. So it's fun to be at that cutting edge, and then there's so much to learn and research. So I caution against kind of going down the rabbit hole when you're new to a test like this. Kind of pull the reins in, try to keep it high level so you can use the test. And then once you kind of get some traction with the test, then you can drill down and go deep on the biochemistry without kind of saying, oh, this is too much for me. Okay, supporting materials, we have a lot of them for you. We want to make this easier for you to use. We've got, of course, sample report. Again, the interpretive guide is it was released in September. It's fantastic. You can find collection instructions online and the product brief. This requires a first morning urine. This is a very convenient test to collect for. Your patients just basically need to pee when they wake up into a cup, and then they can send the specimen off. You can have the kit drop shipped to your patient's house. So it's super convenient, like especially those patients that are not wanting to get to go for a blood draw, a fasting blood draw. This is a nice test to get some information about cellular health. Okay, we have some great clinical support for you too. You can, again, the interpretive guide is there. We have live classes. I teach a live class once a month right now for beginners. So those are kind of smaller classes that are very more comfortable and casual, and they're not recorded, and it just kind of allows everybody to ask questions and learn. We have on-demand webinar recordings. We've got a lot of different recordings on our website. Dan Kalish has done a number of them. David Brady, Betsy Redmond. We've got some great leaders and innovators that are teaching in those webinars, and the DSL Academy also, where you can get recorded modules that are very digestible. And, we're trying to keep in mind that you guys don't have a lot of time for learning. You need to learn in like the nooks and crannies of your schedule. And then, of course, we have one-on-one clinical consultations. So we can handhold you. For those of you who are brand new to this, we're happy to handhold you while you're learning this. And I think that's a great resource as you get a handle on an organic acids test. Here's a view of the educational resources online. Whether you're interested in the organic acids or some of our other tests, you can search by topic. All of the materials related to that topic will come up for you. This is under the education tab on the website. And of course, we've got the Academy too. So for those of you who have an account with us, have ordered one kit, you have access to the full DSL Academy. Let's dive into our case study. So this is where things get interesting. I'll go ahead and ask for your input for those of you who are still with me, paying attention. So just giving you a heads up, that'll be in a few more slides where I want you guys to give me your ideas on what you think, what types of abnormals we would see in this case. So we have a 15-year-old female. She has anxiety. She has intrusive thoughts. She's withdrawn. She doesn't speak much. Her symptoms improve when she is taking binders. So when the gut is addressed, she gets a lot better. But when those binders are removed, her intrusive thoughts flare up almost instantaneously. So the family is, very concerned, very worried. They are considering antipsychotic medications for this young lady, but the parents really believe in natural medicine, and so they're trying to do everything they can to avoid putting their daughter on antipsychotics. She does not complain of any gut issues, no significant bloating or discomfort, and she's having a regular bowel movement every day. Now, she does have a history of mold exposure. The practitioner was treating the entire family, actually. The father was the first one affected. He was, affected by mold. He had been treated and their home was remediated. But then, and they even moved homes, right? So they left the home that had been water damaged. They moved homes, but then later realized that the children were affected. So the kids were coming up with symptoms that were pretty serious. And so they came to this practitioner kind of asking for help. Why are we still sick? We've kind of done everything we were supposed to do. We got out of the sick home, and now we're still sick. So what's going on? How do we get better? This 15-year-old, who we'll call Dee Dee for this purpose, we'll just call her Dee Dee. It makes it a little easier. She was on some supplements. She was on B complex. Again, she was on those binders to kind of bind up stuff in the gut. She was on DHA, vitamin D, phosphatidylcholine, and L-theanine, so they are trying to treat the brain. Okay, so I'm going to open this up for any of you guys who can enter in the chat with these symptoms that we have. We have anxiety, we have intrusive thoughts, psychiatric symptoms, we have a history of mold exposure. What do you think might be abnormal on the organic acids test? You can remember that we're looking at these different categories on the organic acids. And if anyone wants to venture a guess, what might we see abnormal on this young lady's test results? Do you think she has kidney health? Do you think I don't want to give it away. Do you think she has cellular energy problems? Do you think she has neurochemistry problems or sugar metabolism? Do we have any suggestions here?
Yes, there are answers that say mitochondrial function, oxidative stress and glutathione, neurochemistry, dysbiosis, oxidative stress, toxic exposures, neurochemistry, another toxic exposures, and
Great.
another vote for dysbiosis.
Okay, awesome. Okay, these are good answers. Thank you. Okay, this is wonderful. I love that you guys are thinking and that you're with me here. So I think whenever I'm going over a organic acids profile and I know that the patient has psychoemotional symptoms, you're right. I'm thinking about neurotransmitters. That's almost the automatic one. But I love that you guys are also thinking about oxidative stress and glutathione. That is a huge component of brain health, right? We know that neurodegenerative conditions have a major root cause of oxidative stress. So I love that you guys are thinking about that. And mitochondrial is a great answer too. The brain is chock full of mitochondria. So when we have a brain that's struggling, we have to wonder if the brain is making the energy it needs to function. I love that. And dysbiosis, very good one too, right? Because when you have dysbiosis in the gut, you have a toxic burden that then the body has to get rid of. You have inflammation that is a strain on the system. So these are great answers. I think, and we had some audience members mention toxic exposures. Absolutely, these can affect the brain too. So, I every now and then I'll have someone in our classes say all of the categories, and it is kind of true. I think it's a little bit of a not a fair answer, but it's true. Really, many of these categories can be abnormal in someone with neuropsychiatric symptoms, and that's why a test like this is helpful to not kind of have your blinders on, like, oh, they've got neuropsychiatric symptoms, therefore it must be this. Well, actually, it can be a lot of different things, and that's why the test helps us so much. So let's look at what was the case with Dee Dee. Okay, those of you who said mitochondrial dysfunction, spot on. Dee Dee had some very severe mitochondrial dysfunction. Look at this, look at some of these markers. Alpha ketoglutarate acid in the middle there is undetected. It's so high, it's beyond our detection limits, right? On the right-hand side, you see the 95th percent reference interval for alpha ketoglutarate acid was 169.6. She was greater than 1,014. So, I mean, she is hitting this out of the park. And, earlier when I was telling you for those of you who are new to organic acids test, we really just want to think about categories. We're just looking at the Krebs cycle here. So we've got a young lady who is having a lot of trouble making energy, cellular energy. It's like her cells are blocked and energy cannot easily be made. So we want to provide all the cofactors that are needed to run the Krebs cycle. And some of those are shown here, like look directly below alpha ketoglutarate acid. We give you the enzyme that is the next step in the pathway, and then we give you the cofactors, B1, B2, B3, B5, and lipoic acid. So sometimes the report itself tells you exactly what the cofactors are that are needed. And in terms of, here we have a young lady with mitochondrial dysfunction. What are the treatments? B vitamins, lipoic acid, CoQ10, carnitine, glutathione, of course, is wonderful for nourishing mitochondria. And then for those of you, I don't know the full spectrum of our audience today. I don't know how many of you are really advanced in this versus those who are beginners. But for those of you who are beginners and don't know that, maybe that glutathione is great for mitochondria, you can just contact your supplement company of choice and tell them you're looking for mitochondrial support formulas, because really every company that I'm aware of in our industry has some type of mitochondrial targeted product to help with energy production. Also, Dee Dee showed glutathione need. Okay, so those of you who mentioned oxidative stress and glutathione, you were right. So number 48, alpha hydroxybutyric acid. This is a marker of glutathione synthesis, and she is low. Let me see here. Yeah, so she's low. And so she's not making much glutathione. And then pyroglutamic acid is very high over here, extremely high, over the 95th percentile. And this means she is having what we call glutathione wasting. Basically, glutathione is being made and recycled at such a rate, that she's losing some. And so this section is really making us worried about her glutathione status. Now, this really fits for a person who is struggling with mold, right? So glutathione is often a treatment in mold exposure. All right, here's some treatment ideas for glutathione need. You can give N-acetylcysteine. Of course, that's a building block for glutathione. You can give other amino acids, such as the amino acids that make glutathione, like glycine. Glutamine is a helper, also glutamic acid. I mean, glutamic acid, it does help make glutathione, but of course it's not always an amino acid of choice because it has sometimes doesn't have great effects. But glutamine can help build glutathione instead of glutamic acid. Selenium is that cofactor that is so important, and you can give glutathione itself, right? Liposomal glutathione is very popular. Whey encapsulated glutathione that's highly absorbable, and oral glutathione. So there's a lot of great glutathione products out there. And of course, too, when we have someone that needs glutathione, we want to investigate and limit toxins. So let's get rid of toxins to help the patient get by with their glutathione status, or kind of preserve their glutathione status for where it's needed. Let's look at her neurotransmitters, right? That's that go-to section that we think about with someone with neuropsychiatric symptoms. But what was fascinating about Dee Dee is these neurotransmitters were completely normal. Okay, the number 33, homovanillic acid, this is your breakdown product of dopamine. Dopamine checked out, looks good. Number 34, vanillyl mandelic acid, this is your breakdown product of norepinephrine and epinephrine, aka adrenaline and noradrenaline. This marker looked good. And the ratio that compares them and kind of tells us about copper status, number 35, that one looks great. So Dee Dee had good looking neurotransmitters. It was very surprising. Now over to serotonin, number 36 is 5-hydroxyindoleacetic acid. That is your breakdown product of serotonin. And that was a little high normal, right? Serotonin was high normal, but this isn't really, you know, we're more worried about low serotonin typically. High serotonin, you know, it can be stress. It can be like a little bit of, you know, like stress on the system. There's certain, of course, supplements like 5-HTP can cause a high 5-HIA. But in general, I wasn't super worried about the serotonin level compared to some of the other abnormalities that Dee Dee showed. But I do want to just take a moment to mention, to just like reflect on this, the organic acids test helps you assess your patient's dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and serotonin. And actually, quinolinic acid, number 39 here, is a marker of neuroinflammation. So this is very valuable information for any patient that is depressed, anxious, has insomnia. I would love this information on every person who has been on antidepressants or is taking antidepressants, because those medications alter brain chemistry. And I do wish that, you know, clinicians had information about what's really happening with a patient's neurochemistry, not just doling out medications that affect brain chemistry. Okay, so Dee Dee checks out for a lot of her neurotransmitters. Let's keep looking here. She showed dramatic B vitamin needs. Okay, we've got alpha-ketoglutarate acid. Now, we saw this one earlier because it's also in the Krebs cycle. So it is 6 times the reference range. And pyruvic acid is 2.5 times the reference range. So she had some extreme abnormals here. They're flagged with red and H. And if you look under both of these markers, we see that she needs B complex, B1, 2, 3, 5, and lipoic acid. So this young lady needs B vitamins badly. She also showed some mild needs. Again, we're looking for high levels on this test. Remember, a high organic acid means that the patient needs a nutrient. So number 25, vitamin B12 marker, this is methylmalonic acid. You know, it was a little high. These are just over the 80th percentile. So they're not flagged on the report. They're not red. But we can see that they fall into the yellow and red zone, and that she could probably benefit from B12 and folate. Now, pyridoxic acid number 27 is that's actually B6. So you can get a sense of if someone is actually already taking B6 with this test, and then you can also look at markers of functional need for B6. She was on B vitamins, if you guys remember. She was on B vitamins, so that was kind of confirming to see that pyridoxic acid was high normal. And for those of you who picked gut dysbiosis, that was right too. So many of you were right with your suggestions here. She did show dysbiosis. Many of these microbial metabolites were high, normal, let's say. I mean, I would probably call this a moderate dysbiosis because many of these are just over the 80th. It's really number 64 hippuric acid that's super high. It's 1,000 units over the 95th percent limit. And in general, when you see dysbiosis on the organic acids, you don't have a lot of details of exactly what is high, right? These are metabolites of microbes. So you're more it's almost more like a crude measure of, do we have an overgrowth or not? So, clinicians may choose to do any range of things. They could do I mentioned the 5R protocol. That's a nice guideline for ideas for how you may want to intervene on a patient that has a gut dysbiosis like this. There's a range here. You could do gentle things like just supporting digestion and bitter herbs and betaine HCl and making sure they're chewing and eating a healthy diet, right? And probiotics, for example, or fiber. That would be more on the gentle side of things, of just optimizing digestion. Whereas there may be other clinicians that want to do a 5R protocol with antimicrobial herbs and the full 5 steps. And, and then it's perfectly great idea also to run a GI map if that's possible, to get more details about what's going on in the gut. Now, Dee Dee had some other issues, and in the presentation of this case, I really wanted to keep it kind of simple without kind of going over everything on the whole test, because this is a long test. It gives a great bit of information. So I want to mention, though, to you guys the full findings. So I have very high mitochondrial markers, and glutaric acid. So there were other mitochondrial markers showing up, including those that suggested carnitine need. So we didn't talk about those, but of course, making energy from fat requires carnitine in the mitochondria. She had normal or low normal cortisol, so her adrenals looked to be struggling. And she had very high glucaric acid, which is suggesting toxin exposure. So those of you who picked toxicity, you weren't too far off either, although I didn't highlight it in this case. She did have something going on with phase 1 and phase 2 detox. So it's no wonder that she was pretty miserable. Now, we also had some other information on Dee Dee. She had a GI map. And that stool test, for those of you, hopefully some of you are familiar with the GI map, it showed a high Helicobacter pylori. She had significant dysbiosis, including her good bugs, her opportunist, and she had a non-pathogenic parasite. She was not digesting well. She had high beta-glucuronidase, which is a detox and gut marker. And then the immune defenses in her gut lining were depleted. So she was struggling. It was really no wonder that she was struggling so much. So the practitioner identified these 3 key areas. She really focused on the gut dysbiosis and mycotoxins, right? Because remember, this patient improved with binders. And when she got off binders, immediately her neuropsychiatric symptoms flared up. She also put a big emphasis on glutathione and on B vitamins. So that was, sometimes you have to pick a few areas and just work on those, and then later come back and see what else needs attention. Remember, Dee Dee was on a handful of supplements at the time of the test. Okay, just kind of a reminder there. So here's phase 1 of the treatment protocol. This was started around April 2024. So the binders, the clinician had Dee Dee continue and increase these. So she was on charcoal at 300 to 400 milligrams per day, which the clinician did acknowledge this is a high normal dose for a patient this age, but it was necessary in her case. I mean, they were basically trying to, manage these intrusive thoughts. She was also on GI detox, so a variety of binders. The clinician also put her on high dose single B vitamins. So she noted that these doses, let me see here. She was already on a B complex, remember? So the clinician was, really wanting to hit hard these B vitamins. She felt like not relying on the B complex, rather separating them and giving them additionally at high doses would help replete the patient. And these are very high doses. Those of you who are new to integrative and functional medicine, these are not doses that you should use until you're more comfortable. The only one that I would be most concerned about is P5P at 200 milligrams a day. That is a very aggressive dose of P5P. So, and there are patients that need it, right? And there are cases of using these orthomolecular levels of these B vitamins to address illnesses. There are, I think Abram Hoffer is the famous one, I think for, I can't remember if it's seizures or schizophrenia, but some of these B vitamins are used in basically like pharmacological doses. So it's within the spectrum of practice, but I just urge you guys that are new to this to be aware of that with this case. Okay, so also with phase 1, the clinician gave her 300 milligrams twice daily of glutathione, which was the most that Dee could handle. She could not go more. She gave the Designs for Health Complete Mineral Complex at 3 caps per day. And she also gave her chromalin. This was for allergic reaction. This is for allergic reactions typically. It's a product I heard about early on in my work in this industry when patients had allergies, right? That you would give chromalin to help address food allergies and food sensitivities. But the clinician who is experienced mentioned that she notes that this helps with neurological symptoms in patients where the gut is involved. So, I mean, presumably it's helping break down proteins and reduce the allergenicity of things in the diet, and that could help a patient who's struggling. And that's my guess of the mechanism of action there. There was a second phase to this protocol too. There was black walnut matrix, 2 caps twice daily for 6 weeks, including a host of antimicrobials in that formula. She gave mastic gum for the H. pylori at 3,000 milligrams a day. She gave standard doses of butyrate to nourish the gut lining and the microbiome, and also slippery elm to help with the gut lining as well. So this is what happened with Dee. Within 1 month of treatment, she reported that her intrusive thoughts completely stopped. Okay, by September, Dee had not had any more intrusive thoughts. So they had completely stopped since May and continued into September. She had fewer mood changes. She was more open. She was less withdrawn. Things were easier to do for her, and her parents reported the same results. They were noticing that everything was easier and better for her. So this was very encouraging, great news. The next step then for the clinician is to discontinue the binders, right? Because those binders, when she comes off the binders, her symptoms flare up. So that was going to be the ultimate test. Had they, will they get her free, will they help her be symptom free even without binders? So I want to thank Jesselyn Shamas, naturopathic doctor at Clementine Natural Health, who shared this case with me and was generous with her time. And we're so lucky to have cases like this to help us all learn. And just a reminder before we start bringing this to a close that when you're working with this report, just keep it simple. Take one category at a time, look for those high markers, those high levels, figure out what the nutrient is that's associated with the high level, Keep in mind those 95th percent elevations, those are extremely important. Those are your high priority items. And dive deeper into the biochemistry when you can, right? When you have the bandwidth to really dig in and sink your teeth into the biochemistry, you can do that. But I think when you're starting out, just try to keep it high level so that you can actually start using the tool. So to wrap up, I really love this test for patients with psychiatric symptoms. I think it gives us a lot of useful information. This is a powerful tool for clinical practice, screening across multiple systems, and it's just a single urine specimen. In this patient, DD, with neuropsychiatric complaints, we found issues with mitochondrial function, glutathione, B vitamins, and gut dysbiosis. Her neurotransmitters, surprisingly, were normal for the most part. So it really shows us that not every neuropsychiatric case is the same, right? They're not all going to be the same. They're going to have, everybody's a snowflake, right? Everybody's biochemistry can be different when they're struggling with, even with the same types of symptoms. A comprehensive treatment based on these OAP results and GI map results, because there were two lab tests used here, included high-dose B vitamins, glutathione, and antimicrobials, which resolved her anxiety and intrusive thoughts after 1 month and lasted for until present time, which was 5 months at the time of writing up this case. And the patient and family were pleased with her progress and continued to be hopeful that they would not have to put her on antipsychotic medications. So if you are interested in the organic acids, consider ordering a kit for you, for your family member, or maybe a staff member. You can practice it on yourself or family member. And again, I've mentioned earlier, you can have the kit drop shipped to a patient's home, which is really easy. Our customer service team is wonderful. They can help you out. You can also just order it online if you don't want to make a phone call. And again, schedule a consultation when you're ready to talk with us. One of the little tricks is when you know your patient sends off their urine specimen, go ahead and schedule your consultation so that you'll have it all ready to go when the test results come back. So thank you, everybody, for your attention, for those of you who hung in there with me till the end. And I am able to take some questions. So thank you.
A number of questions for you today. Which markers show cortisol levels on the OAP?
Yes. Okay. We have cortisol and we measure the cortisol-cortisone ratio. So it's a urine cortisol. I mean, it's a marker I love. I actually like to take credit. I did suggest it to the lab to add to the panel when we were developing the panel years ago. It correlates with 24-hour urine cortisol. So it's a nice test. And so there's cortisol and the cortisol-cortisone ratio. So of course, cortisol would give you a sense of, is your patient stressed out? Or are they depleted in cortisol? You know, are they high or are they low? Those would both be of concern. The cortisol-cortisone ratio is telling you basically, are they cortisol dominant, right? Cortisone is more of your anti-inflammatory version in that pathway. So the cortisol to cortisone ratio is like cortisol's dominant. So you get a good sense of if your patient is stressed out, and that might, I mean, you can treat based off of that, or you could do further testing.
Thank you so much, Cass. Okay. A practitioner asks, I see a lot of people with low lysine. Do you think of hypochlorhydria, malabsorption when low? I know it's linked to ADD. It seems like most people need free-form amino acids because they aren't digesting protein. What do you think?
Okay, great question. Thank you. Now, this applies for those of you who aren't familiar with the omics test. This applies to the omics. So for people who are new to metabolomics testing, I suggest that you start with the OAP, because this one is kind of the challenging one to really get a hold of and use and get effective use with. But once you have it under your wing, then you can upgrade and do the omics, which adds on amino acids, right? The building blocks of proteins. And also amino acids are precursors and in themselves neurotransmitters. So it adds a lot to neurological testing. But your question about lysine We do see low lysine, and yes, when I see a lot of low amino acids, now it depends if it's blood or urine, because you do have a choice which test you run. But a low blood lysine, it's telling me that the patient cannot keep up their lysine levels during an overnight fast. And I agree with you. I actually agree with you that I think there's a good number of people that need amino acids, that need free-form amino acids. Either they're not eating enough protein, they're not digesting and absorbing their protein, like you said. They may need betaine HCl, or they may have digestive enzyme insufficiency. Those are really the main things. When we see low amino acids, either they're not eating enough, or sometimes your patient will be like, well, I'm on a paleo diet, I eat meat at every meal. Then those patients, if they have low amino acids, that's very surprising. So really then you're looking at digestive issues. They may not be digesting, they may have dysbiosis that's interfering in digestion and absorption. So you're right that the gut is where we look, if you know for sure they're getting enough protein and those amino acids. But I think that, a free-form amino acid can be very helpful for a lot of different conditions, especially like fatigue and any type of neurological symptoms. Also, like people that can't sustain muscle mass. So, if I saw those symptoms along with low aminos, I would definitely want to put them on aminos.
Thank you so much. What markers do you look for with Parkinson's disease, and how do you supplement for that?
Oh, well, good. That's a great question. Parkinson's, of course, is complex. The areas where I would be really focused in Parkinson's would be I'd want to see neurotransmitters, right? Parkinson's is theoretically a dopamine. Well, the current treatments target dopamine. So we'd like to see what dopamine is. And you can see this with this test. Now, when a patient is on levodopa, of course, their dopamine marker will be sky high. That's one of the cool things about this test. You can see pharmacological treatments in action, especially those treatments that target neurotransmitters. But so I'd want to check neurotransmitters. Let's see how those are doing, right? It's the nervous system. Let's check on mitochondria, because the brain is rich in mitochondria, the nervous system is rich in mitochondria, and we need all of those cells to be making energy and functioning properly. I would, of course, oxidative stress and glutathione are huge when it comes to neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's. So those would be my top areas. Toxins are very important. There is a whole concept in our field that, it is a disease of toxicity. And so, checking on toxins, and that's where glutathione comes in as well. Now, that doesn't mean that your Parkinson's patient is going to look like that on the report. I have to warn you, because people do not always fit these molds of what we expect based on the literature. So, the Parkinson's patient could have gut dysbiosis and blood sugar dysregulation and, other things, cortisol and things like that. So that's why it's nice to gather as much information as you can. And, in a Parkinson's patient, I would also want to gather as much as I can, right? I'd love to know more about that type of patient as well. But I think this is a really nice one-shot test if that's all you can do for that type of patient.
Okay, those are all the questions we have time for today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. Thank you so much, Cass, for a great presentation, and we hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.